conferences. So, but this was my first one within Baltimore. Interesting setting, downtown Baltimore. It's nice near the harbor. But I will talk about not just environment, but what I experienced and attended. So one of the events that I went to was led by Dr. Anthony Hunt, who is a minister in the Baltimore City and also a professor at one of the schools within that area dealing with systematic theology. And he had a workshop focusing on urban ministry and leadership within those congregations. Being that that is somewhat of an interest of mine and focus to lead a congregation dealing with urban issues in an urban environment, I felt the need to listen and learn and see what he had to offer. And I'm going to try to be as short as possible. Don't want to give a sermon, so to speak. But one of the key things that he mentioned was developing an engagement with the neighborhood that you're in. I felt that is vital for any church, to know what is around them, how to develop relationships with the people and organizations that are there, and to create a bond which could serve that community. So that was one of the events I went to. I don't know, Minnie, are you going to talk about?
Nope. Lady session's all on you, my friend. Okay. No, just say it.
Okay. In the lady session for me, it was also an interesting experience. Coming from the Wisconsin Annual Conference, diversity is something that our conference does not have to the extent of Baltimore or within the East Coast. So it was a pleasant surprise to see shades of different colors, either being from East Indian descent to the Orient, to the Latin Americans and Africans and African Americans and so forth. So that was a beautiful setting to know that our connectional church is connecting with others in the world. So it was a great experience to know that I'm now a part of a conference that looks like the world I want to see.
Thanks, Nya. When I go around the country, I often tell people that Baltimore, Washington is somewhat the poster child for dealing with our history of having been a black annual conference and a white annual conference coming together. And as a result, we really are one of the most diverse, ethnically, racially, historically, country-wise in the United States. So, and in the laity session, you really get that feeling. So I'm glad you were able to be there. So you've all been to conferences, or maybe not. For those of you who haven't, I thought I'd just kind of walk you through the experience a little. So the first thing in my bag is my car keys, which I left at home. No, it was a good thing. Linda Lacey and I are the lay members from your congregation to annual conference, and Linda and I met at the Alexandria Amtrak station on Wednesday morning, and we took the train to Baltimore. So I left my keys at home, and we took the train, and it was wonderful. So when you get to a conference, sometimes they give you a bag. So this was the bag this year. It says, Deepen Discipleship, Multiply Impact, See All the People, and it has 100 at 100. I don't really know what that was all about because this was our 239th annual conference. But anyway, it was a nice bag. So you also get a name tag. So here's my name tag. I added my own Reconciling Ministries necklace and lanyard. And you get a ribbon that indicates whether you're a lay member or a clergy member. So the lay people have a white one. I don't know what color Chip's was, maybe green or something, or blue, I think, for clergy. Anyway, and then you can collect these other ribbons. So this one says, I love camp, because we love camp at Dumbarton. We go to West River, where we're going to go in October for our retreat. So I saw Chris Schlickert, who is the director, the new Andy Thornton, who is director of camping ministry in the annual conference. And so I got a ribbon from Chris. So let's see, we also, of course, you get a program, and on your bulletin you'll see this picture. It's all about love. So I'm going to pull out my script, so now you don't have to quite plan that I'm going to be off the cuff totally. When you go to a conference, after you get all of this stuff, there's usually a display area. And so this year, the display area was in one of the large rooms, sort of the lobby of the hotel. And there were many, many display groups, but I want this congregation to know that in recent years, when I first started going to annual conferences, Baltimore, Washington area Reconciling Ministries was allowed to be in the hallway outside with other exhibitors who were not necessarily part of the United Methodist connection. Over the last probably 5 years, Be Warm has been in the room, so woohoo! And even though they're listed alphabetically, we're first. So these were all the exhibitors, and I'll just raise a few that Neil sent me a few reflections to. So does that mean I get 10 minutes since Neil sent me 3 pages of notes? No. Okay. The Disabilities Ministries was right next to me, which was really great because my friend Nancy Webb, who many of you know, is a blind clergywoman who is visually impaired from birth. She has served in many churches. She is my inspiration for getting around and been my educational fund. But I also met the chairperson of the annual conference Disabilities Ministry, Yvonne, and we became good buddies because we were sitting near each other. I was at the Be Warm table some of the time. The other thing about the Be Warm table is that many people stopped by and asked what it meant and what do you have to do to become a reconciling congregation. And the good news is that these were people from the far reaches of our annual conference. If you know anything about the political outline of Baltimore, Washington Annual Conference, we go from West Virginia on the west to Annapolis on the east. And the outest, westernmost and the easternmost are quite conservative. So to have churches and people from those churches stop to get that information is a huge sign of progress for us. We also had more people of color stopping to ask about it and picking up the information about how to become reconciling. There was a table about immigration and migration and how that's interpreted. Stories from current migrants coming from Arizona, Texas, and Florida. Many of you know the somewhat horror stories of the governors of Texas and Florida putting these people on buses and sending them to our vice president's home. Now they sometimes get to Capitol Hill, but Capitol Hill United Methodist is one of the receiving centers. So again, a United Methodist presence in that ministry. The Gun Violence Prevention Group had a display with their orange on for the Gun Violence Awareness Day. Baltimore, Washington, again, is a very active area for organizing on that topic because of our proximity to the Capitol, but also being representing 2 states and the District of Columbia. So a lot of public witness. Moms Demand Action came out of this area. We know our own Jennifer Stapleton was active with that. A new one, I would say, and I go back to my keys, was the Creation Care Team. We started to be very organized in doing more environmental issues and environmental care. There's a staff person at the General Board of Church and Society committed and dedicated to doing environmental work and education around the country. They had a table, and they had the when Neil dictates his text. So, is it the tempest tree? Has anybody heard of this? I think it's a temperature tree, actually. And it's a woven piece that shows the increase of CO2 emissions at global warming. Woven with threads from cooler colors, and the proportion of it shows how rapidly we're changing to the much hotter time. So there's always a person there who has African designed clothing, which is just so celebratory, inspirational jewelry, and of course Wesley Seminary always has presence, as well as the group who is always looking for people who are called to ordained ministry. So congratulations on your first step. Use one of these QR codes to get more information. Maybe you're looking for a second career, any of you? Or first career? Okay. The other thing Rachel wanted me to be sure to talk about was that it was just great to be together in person. And I have to say it's a totally different experience, as we all know. We love you on Zoom, but come back to church if you can. There's nothing like being together in person. And there were over 1,000 members in this annual conference, so we were all in one ballroom. It was really exciting. The first thing we did, though, was sit at round tables to get better acquainted, to get reacquainted, to talk about what we've been doing, what's important to us, and what our churches are doing. Another thing that, and this is well, I'm going to tell you about legislation, and then that we had some fun. So there were a few pieces of legislation that happened that are really important to our witness and our primary goals and our focus. One was that we supported a resolution that will go to the General Conference to remove all instances of discriminatory language in the Book of Discipline. And there's about 8 different places where that occurs, and they were all spelled out, and they will all go forward to the General Conference to request that that be voted out. There was also a resolution, again, that will go to the General Conference to support regionalization of the United Methodist Church. If you don't understand what that's about, please ask someone. You may have heard of the Christmas Covenant. Back when we were being totally racist and white patriarchy, we divided the church into the black churches and the white churches. We finally reunited about only 50 years ago as the United Methodist Church. We still have a lot of work to do. But it left the central conferences, that's Africa, the Philippines, and Europe, as separate entities, and the United States, but altogether we were part of the General Conference umbrella. The only place for the United States to do United States church business is at the General Conference. Regionalization would give us sort of the same status as Philippines, Europe, and the African annual conferences, and giving us sort of a governance structure that would allow us to have a meeting and meet together as the United States, as a regional conference. There would be no more central conferences. That's from that old time that was so racist. We would all become regional conferences where each region can make decisions about their ministry and their context that's important to them. Neil sat with the youth delegates, which he really enjoyed, and helped them understand what was going on. There were about 30 youth delegates who had been made members of the annual conference, and so he was one of the adults that sat with them to help them understand the process. He said overwhelmingly they're in favor of full inclusion of LGBTQIA+ persons. He shared with me that there were three of the, or maybe 4 or 5 of the 30, who all identified as non-binary or other. They were in support of the resolution relating to Israel and its military maintaining an apartheid state, and they supported queer delegates. So there were a number of these that, the only other one I'm just going to talk about is one that many of you signed on to that I presented about calling out Israel about their apartheid practices in the Middle East, that the way they're treating Palestine is very much like what happened in South Africa. And so there was some very interesting discussion. There's still a lot of anti-Palestinian feelings out there. The questions I got were things like, well, there's a lot of places where there's bad things going on. Why would we pick only one? So to which I responded, well, I know there's a lot of them, but does that excuse us from calling out one that we know is going on? Someone else said, well, those Palestinians all want to kill the Israelis. And so I pointed out the problem of casting everyone as the bad guys, or casting everyone with one swash, one color or one experience. Happened to be coming from a gentleman, layperson, who has challenged me for 30 years on full inclusion. And so I said, Johnny, come on. Just as you and I are not the same as Christians and Methodists in this conference, so all Palestinians are not the same. So it did pass. So thank you to all who supported it, the resolution about apartheid. I want to share just another quick minute that we had fun. We always take collections. One of them was for a program that Bishop Easterling started called Seeds of Security. It's for abused women and women who are in abusive situations and relationships. They have locations where they can go to be safe. They're connected to a lot of mental health and financial and other support systems in the Baltimore area. We took a collection up. We made about $7,000 from the collection. So that was the first afternoon. The next morning, Bishop announced that this was the case. And she said she and her husband, and she turned to her husband and said, is this okay if we do this? And he goes, no. Well, we'd like to give a gift to make it, we like round numbers, so we'd like to give a gift to make it $10,000. And so up pops one of her district superintendents and said, wait a minute, Bishop, I think we can do more. And she gets up there like an auctioneer and she says, okay, who over here can give another $100? Okay, who over here can give another, okay, and all the way across the 1,000 delegates. And we ended up raising $16,000 for Seeds of Security. All in a little fun, too. Also, as not part of my apartheid resolution, but one of the asks from the apartheid resolution was that every member of the Baltimore-Washington Conference be encouraged to contact their congressperson to not support Israel unless they do away with many of these practices. The second part of the resolution of the ask was that no trips out of the Baltimore-Washington Conference would go to Israel without having an opportunity to speak to Palestinians. And so I'm thrilled to let you know that the bishop will be leading a Holy Land pilgrimage in January. There are still openings available. And she is working with an organization that makes sure that both sides are heard. There was also a karaoke night with dancing. I didn't get to go, but Neil apparently did, and he said it was great. So we're working on regaining our connection, and it was great fun. I'm going to turn it over to Chip to tell you the one piece that was hard, and thank you all.
Thank you, Mittie. I think Mittie was a little humble about her presenting about the Palestinian resolution. You've got your keys now. Jim, she has the keys in the back. Because when you present these resolutions, first there was a video clip of you explaining the resolution. Mittie was videoed explaining the resolution, and then she had to stand at the podium and be peppered with these questions, like these questions about, well, the word apartheid should only be used with regard to South Africa, and we shouldn't use the word apartheid around Israeli and Palestinian issues. Mittie just very calmly take a breath and respond about how this is also an apartheid system. She did much better than I would have, let me tell you. I said I would talk a little bit about disaffiliation. If you know what if you've heard us talking about disaffiliation in the United Methodist Church, raise your hand. If you'd like me not to talk about disaffiliation, raise your other hand. I've avoided knowing a lot of the details about disaffiliation because it's a painful issue. You know, we often hear the personal is political, political is personal. I went to remind myself some details about disaffiliation in the United Methodist Church, and the first article that popped up for me was from the news organization Politico, and their story about disaffiliation in the United Methodist, why you should care about disaffiliation in the United Methodist Church. Politico's writing about this in their history section. And what they pointed out was the last time what was called the Methodist Episcopal Church split like this was in the 1840s. We were splitting over the issue of slavery. That was when the Southern Methodist Church was forming in the 1840s, the 1850s. And what followed that was the Civil War. Now, Politico's not trying to say that the split in our United Methodist Church is a precursor of the Civil War, but they are saying it's indicative of the kind of split that we have in our country as a whole. I have a good friend who, through the Reconciling Movement, who's a pastor on the West Coast, who refers to all of those formerly United Methodist churches who have determined they're leaving as Confederate Methodist churches. So it's a bit of an interesting aspect of this year. This year has some real historicity because of this. Because of my job at Wesley, I attended 3 different United Methodist annual conferences. And the first I went to is Susquehanna Annual Conference, which if you think of dividing Pennsylvania into thirds, there's an Eastern PA conference and a Western PA conference, and right in the center is Susquehanna Annual Conference. And because of the changes happening in the demographics of the United Methodist Church, of how some bishops retired during COVID, and we needed other bishops to take over their responsibility. Susquehanna Annual Conference in central Pennsylvania, Western PA, and West Virginia Conference, 3 conferences, pretty big landmass, are supervised by 2 bishops who share the responsibility. Bishop Sandra Steiner Ball and Bishop Cynthia Moore Coy. Cynthia Moore Coy was elected from Baltimore when she became a bishop, and so she's sort of a local person that we know. So these 2 bishops serve these areas. And as I was getting ready to go up to Susquehanna Annual Conference, I went back and I read their schedule to see what I was going to show up for. And they were going to begin the conference on Thursday morning. But on Wednesday evening, they worked with disaffiliation. And disaffiliation are those congregations that have chosen to leave the United Methodist Church. And they've chosen to leave the United Methodist Church after being built from the ground up by the United Methodist Church, having generations of United Methodists within the church, and they because of the shape of the language of allowing them to leave, they have to say that they disagree with the United Methodist stand on human sexuality, right? They're assuming, well, so they disagree enough that they're going to leave. Now let me tell you what the United Methodist official stance on homosexuality is. It is that no avowed practicing homosexual may be taken as a candidate for ministry, ordained, or if ordained, appointed. Pretty harsh, right? We also have language in the United Methodist system at this time that says same-gender marriages may not be performed by United Methodist clergy and may not be performed in United Methodist churches. Now they're leaving because that language is not harsh enough for them. You know, this is where it gets personal. This is where it gets personal. And they are assuming that at the next general conference that language is going to get softer. And they don't want to be a part of a church that gets softer on those issues. That's where it gets personal. So when I was headed up to Susquehanna Annual Conference on a Wednesday evening, the evening before conference began, the bishops had said, we're going to deal with disaffiliation tonight. We're going to vote. Once you are asking to disaffiliate, once you have disaffiliated, if you were the lay representative, like Mittie was and Linda were for us, if you were the lay representative, you can go home. If you were the clergy representative of the congregation, you were allowed to stay, but you were asked not to vote on anything else. You were saying you no longer are going to be United Methodist. And there's a really complicated formula. It has to do with how much money they have to pay toward pensions and how much of their mission shares they have to pay. It's complicated. But for the folks in Susquehanna Annual Conference, that meant 172 of their churches left on Wednesday night. And these two bishops, organizing this and taking care of these votes, then they also were dealing with Western Pennsylvania, which is more conservative than Central Pennsylvania. 298 of their churches left. In West Virginia, 252 of their churches left. And I had clergy friends who I said, "How you doing?" And they were in tears because it could have been their mother's church, the church that they first served. Disaffiliation was a painful process. And let me just say, if you want to fact check these numbers, there's also it's all a little squirmy. What is it? They're in the fact that there are churches that are trying to disaffiliate right now before a December deadline prevents them from using this process. These numbers don't include churches that are trying to disaffiliate using a legal system to get out of the process. And some of these numbers don't include churches that have previously disaffiliated over the last 2 or 3 years. Now, in comparison to this, Baltimore, Washington had 23 churches disaffiliated. Now, I don't want to be too blithe about it, but I will say most of the churches in Baltimore, Washington that said we're leaving under this process are very small congregations, almost all very rural congregations. The largest of the churches is probably the one here at Oakdale Emory that's up in Olney, Maryland, that was leaving. And at the same time, while Na and Mittie may have gone to a laity session, I was at a clergy session where we were given a list of names of clergy who were going to leave the United Methodist Church to join another denomination at the same time. Our bishop, Estelle Easterling, she has this territory that is Baltimore, Washington, D.C., and most of Maryland, and she was given a second annual conference to supervise, as you may know, Peninsula Delaware, which is the rest of Maryland across the Annapolis Bridge, and all the state of Delaware is her responsibility. So she dealt with disaffiliation in Baltimore, Washington, where we had this vote. There was a time for folks to get up and speak about disaffiliation. Some of the folks who were choosing to disaffiliate got up and they whined about the fact that they were having to pay to leave the United Methodist Church, and this is really unfair, that they were leaving the United Methodist Church over many reasons, and blah, blah, blah. And some folks said, let's just go ahead and vote on it. Now, the one that really, you want to get personal, it's the guy who stood up and said, I led my congregation through this whole process. I was really hoping we were going to disaffiliate, and the vote came out about 50-50. You had to have a 2/3 majority to disaffiliate in a congregation vote. So I'm really disappointed. Let's go ahead and vote and let the others go. Well, I sort of lost my place. So Bishop Easterling dealt with 23 of our United Methodist churches in Baltimore, Washington leaving. The very next week, she had to cross the bridge, go down to Princess Anne, Maryland, and supervise the Peninsula Delaware Annual Conference. When you cross the bridge in Annapolis, around the peninsula area, there are 416 United Methodist churches. 92 of them left the United Methodist Church that day. And she planned that we would have this vote, and then there would be a time of prayer, acknowledgement, lamentation, letting go. But like I say, for an awful lot of people, this was a very painful process. Across the United States, there are some churches that, there's some regions that there was much less of this disaffiliation. Some there was much more. Across the country, I think the number ended up being somewhere above, slightly above 6,000 churches said we're leaving the United Methodist Church. They didn't all join a global Methodist church, which was one of the options. Some just said we're going to do something else. We're going to be our own church. I think that's about 5%. Now, if we have any economists here or people who study a lot of statistics, don't hold me on that. But it does mean that this was a historic year as many, many United Methodist churches joined a confederacy that's mostly known as the Global Methodist Church. There was a whole side of my notes which is sort of tracing back to, there's a pre-COVID 2019 General Conference that was supposed to vote on a package to make our tent wide enough in Methodism for both the conservative and liberals to make decisions. As I was driving in this morning, I don't know if Catherine Johnson is on with us this morning, but if you remember, Catherine used to be the executive director of our Methodist Federation for Social Action and led General Conference efforts around changing legislative language around homosexuality in church a number of times. Catherine, at one of our general conferences, and I'm not going to hit the right year, had this slight brilliance of saying, let's just vote to say that we don't agree on these issues and that we can live together without being in agreement. And we worked hard on that legislation to say we are not of one mind, I think is the language that's used. We're not of one mind, but we can live together around these issues. And that got voted down. I think it was at that point Catherine said, I can't help you across this divide. When the United Methodist Church can't vote to say we disagree on an issue we obviously disagree on. But what the folks in the middle and the folks on the left hoped was going to happen in 2019 didn't happen, so that much more restrictive and punitive language got put into the United Methodist discipline, and conservatives thought that was going to open the door for progressive churches like Dumbarton to leave. And it's at that point we did start to have discussion about, do we leave the United Methodist Church? Does Dumbarton disaffiliate from the United Methodist Church to be part of a more progressive tradition? And I think conservatives thought they were going to hold the door open and all the liberals are going to walk out to form their own new church. What happened instead is all the Methodists in the middle went, crap, I don't want to be known with those people. And everybody came home from the conference to find their churches festooned with rainbow flags going, we want to become reconciling, and the number of churches and individuals that voted to become reconciling after that annual conference just went through the roof. So that's why the conservatives are afraid that we're going to get softer on the issue of homosexuality and why they asked themselves to go out the door, allowed themselves to go out the door. And I've probably gone on longer than I should, but to say, and it's all about love. It's all about love. The old story about the rabbi who was asked whether he could say what God's whole law is while he was standing on one foot. He said, yeah, I can do that. He stood on one foot and he said, the entire law comes down to love God and love your neighbor. He put his other foot down. For us, it is all about love. Love of God, love of neighbor, love of self. And to lead those who are wanting to be loving those who have not seen themselves loved within the United Methodist Church, to give them a place where they know they are welcome. Amen. At this point, we have an opportunity to present our offerings. We have multiple ways that we can do offerings. There are boxes here at the back of the sanctuary. Of course, one can mail a check to the church office. There is a QR code and links on our bulletin which allow you to easily go to the credit card giving location. But your gifts support all these things that we're able to do to send delegates, leadership to our annual conference, and to show others what it means to love neighbor as you love yourself. And as we receive that offering, we get to enjoy Sydney and Stephen again.